Over the last couple of days, you might have seen a compilation of rumoured leaks that have popped up. They've sort of popped up everywhere, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk about them, but I have been asked, and I counted 37 times on my opinion on them, including during my last round WTC game, so I thought, you know what, screw it. Let's have a look at them. Let's see what we think. Before I get into talking about the leaks themselves, I do want to talk about an article that was posted today, and you might be surprised to see Legacies of Middle-earth. That's very much not the game that this channel is normally associated with, and it's not a game that I play myself, but I was sent this link to have a look because there is an interesting sentence in here. So there's a new edition of Middle-earth, and I believe the new edition has been out for a few months, something along those lines. I'm not really sure on the timeline of it. However, there is some text here that is interesting. For those of you with existing collections, we've also created 2 legacy documents, which include rules and models for Army Lists Not Covered in the Army's publications. So this is very similar to what we have in the old world. We've got the Forces of Fantasy, we've got the, whatever the evil one is, the good and evil books. I should have checked those before I started recording. However, also, we've got a swathe of PDFs. You know, there's 7 or 8 PDFs, which include all of the legacy armies that haven't made it into the old game proper. However, if we scroll down here, you can see they are not intended for use in match play events and will not be legal for any official Games Workshop events, nor events officially supported by Games Workshop. And this ties into what we heard when I was speaking to the organisers of the Las Vegas Open back in January. That was something where they were told that they could get support, but not if they were allowing legacy factions, and obviously they didn't go with that, which is fantastic for the health of the game, I think. However, it says you can use them on your own tables, and event organisers are more than welcome to use them at their own events, as long as it's clear to all participants that the documents are in use. This is not a hard and fast change, but it is a tonal shift in what we've seen previously. If I go back to look at the previous document, yeah, there we go. So I've went back and have a look at the old world download the legacy PDFs that they put out in January of last year, and it says, while these are complete lists, there are no plans to release models, miniatures to use them with. They're intended for people who already have armies in their collection. So I think it's just an interesting tonal shift between what we've got here, where it says feel free to use them at your events, just make it clear to the participants, whereas here it is more of a hard line in the sand. It's like, we're not supporting them. It does say earlier in the article as well that they will not be getting any further support, or there's no plans for further support. So an interesting tonal shift, and hopefully something we see reflected in the FAQ that's coming up, because if we get an FAQ drop that addresses the regular factions, the actual mainline factions that you see at most events, but it doesn't touch the legacy factions, there is going to be more of a gap between the haves and have-nots, which is a little bit of a concern. So I wanted to talk about that because I think that's important for how we address sort of intent or what we think about the FAQ that's coming up. So this is the list of changes that we've got here, and there's been, I've seen it pop up in various places. The first place that I saw it was the TSN Arena WhatsApp group, but someone had shared it from somewhere else. I haven't been able to verify where these leaks come from, so having played Warhammer for long enough, every time there's an FAQ rumoured, and this is more experience coming from other games like 40k, where there's lots of FAQs. Every 3 months there's some sort of change. There's almost always a post like this that's almost always fake. That's the problem I have coming into this. Whether it's trustworthy or not it's hard to say. But with that out of the way, I think it's worth looking at this through the context of, if it is true, what do I think about it? How do I think it's going to change things? So we'll sort of work through line by line. Something else that's worth addressing is on the Warhammer Fantasy Discord, the main one. There's someone on there who has been pretty voracious with spreading leaks previously, and they said that it's not 100% what they know, but it does line up with things that they've seen, and it's only part of the whole. So if it is true, there is more coming. So that's interesting. Whether or not that adds some validity to it, hard to say. But yeah, so if this is true, there is more coming, I think, is the important thing to take away from that. So let's go through and see what the changes are, and start to think about what the changes are going to be. And it's very difficult to theorize what this is going to make a difference in terms of. There are lots of things that, if you go line by line, you're going to miss overlapping changes. So One change to dragons, for example, like the first line here, close order bonus for unit strength 10 plus only. Suddenly, dragons, with the exception of chaos dragons, lose close order. So they suddenly go from having a max of 7 combat res to a max of 6. Well, as it stands, that's a bit of a bummer in terms of the reliability of a dragon. A lot of the time you're going into a challenge and you're going to be hitting that overkill. You're going to be getting the 1 wound for the unit champion, the 5 for the overkill. You would be getting 1 for close order, so you'd be getting 7. Now you're down to 6. It's still really hard for infantry in the current game to get 6 combat res without putting something in the unit, like a battle standard bearer with a war banner. You know, you need something else to get there typically. However, if you then look at it through the lens of other changes, maybe there's more differences there. So, first of all, close order bonus for unit strength 10 plus only. I think this is good. I think this helps in terms of a lot of the things that are good in the game are either single models or small units. So we have seen a bit of a skew towards Death Stars over the last 6 to 8 months. But if you take out the Death Stars from the meta, the stuff that people are running, they're not running big units of infantry. They're running stuff like units of 5 or 6 cavalry. They're running dragons. They're running necrosphinxes, all of these things. Almost all of those are either losing the close order bonus or losing it in conjunction with like taking a couple of wounds. So if I've got 6 cavalry, I like heavy cavalry, especially core heavy cavalry. 6 is sort of the right number. It feels about right to play with 6. You can go up to 7. But if I take 2 wounds on that unit, if I lose 2 models and I'm down to 4, I still punch reasonably hard, but I lose my static combat res that I get for being close order, if this is true. So that's quite a big change, I think, and I like it in terms of just starting to incentivize towards making infantry a little bit better, a little bit more interesting. Only infantry and cavalry can get a 2-up armor save. Amazing. Great. We don't need to see dragons with 2-up armor saves. As someone who regularly plays with a dragon with a 2-up armor save, this is good because I think it helps squeeze the haves and the have-nots were previously quite spread apart, and it makes the haves and have-nots closer. So, for example, against poison shooting, you want to have a 2-up armor save realistically, or a triple save. Now you can't get a 2-up armor save, so it makes it less of an issue in terms of which big thing that you're being shot at with. Being capped at that 3-up armor save is nice. I don't think there's anything in here. I would like to see them cap monsters at only 2 saves. I think if you have like a 3-up, 5-up, that's really strong. Having a 3-up, 5-up, 5-up is still probably too good in terms of just stacking enough points, enough defenses onto one unit that it becomes almost impossible to deal with outside of, you know, the gimmicks that we have seen become the meta, which is the big poison shooting brings. Supporting attacks can only be made within your base movement. I've seen a lot of discussion about this, and I'm not 100% sure how this works, but I think what it's meant to do is it's meant to stop Linehammer, which is fine. Linehammer is not what you think of when you look at the game, but also I'm not necessarily feeling like it's a strategy that needs to be nerfed. Maybe in conjunction with other things that are going to make infantry better as we get down the list, it's more important. But yeah, so I think the way that this works is, let's say I've got a unit that's 20 models wide, and you charge a model that's 25 mil into the front of my 25 mil base. You maximize, so there's 3 in base-to-base contact. I'd only be able to make supporting attacks, that's the ones that are not in base-to-base, within my movement. So let's say I'm a dwarf, I've only got 3 inches worth of movement, which is like 2 more models on each side. So, well, 3 more models on each side, I should say, sorry. So instead of having the full rank of 20, I'd only get 9 attacks. This is a change. That's the most extreme example I can think of. Sure, I don't really have any strong feelings on it. You still get to make attacks. I think my biggest issue with this is if it's true, and this is one of the things that make me go, I don't know if this is true. It feels quite clunky. It's a little bit odd in terms of just being like, oh, you know, let me measure out which models are in base to base. This feels almost like a little bit of a return to, you know, you've got to measure your movement, not the movement, you scatter a template after you throw a rock at someone, and then you go like, oh, do I hit 6 people? Do I hit 7? I think it adds a little bit of that clumsiness to the rules, so I don't love that. I'm not against them limiting Linehammer as a general rule, but this feels like a bit of a clunky way of doing it, so. This is also all summaries that I believe has been translated I saw someone say it's been translated from Games Workshop language to Spanish, then back to English. So the exact wording may not be exact. So yeah, we'll see. This is one that I'm not going to say I'm concerned, but I don't love the way that it theoretically works out. Impetuous is now based on leadership. That's very cool. Huge fan of that. It feels bad to play Impetuous units as it stands. And I don't mean playing Orcs and Goblins, although when I played Orcs and Goblins I did skew towards more reliable things. I mean more Dragon Princes. Should a Dragon Prince be as likely to run at you as a unit of Boar Boys? I would say no. I think the Dragon Princes should be able to identify that there's a Chaos Dragon in front of them, which is going to ruin their day, so making them have a higher barrier to making a stupid decision than the Orcs makes sense to me. And if it's based on leadership, fantastic. I think this works really well. The stuff that you'd expect to be more controlled is now a leadership test, so it makes sense. The things like elves with leadership 9 Dragon Princes compared to your leadership 7, I think it is, Orc Boar Boys. So, big fan of that. I wonder if you can still use the leadership of your general, or if it's just unmodified leadership. I think I'd like to see unmodified leadership. Although if you've got a character in the unit, obviously you test at the highest leadership. But I feel like impetuosity is something that I would be okay with not seeing. Like, the general doesn't have an effect on it. Yes, he's there, he's shouting at you to hold back, but you're like, but I can get him. I want to go for it. So, yeah, anyway. This seems good, if it's true. Chaos Dragon is now impetuous. Now, I'm wondering if this is tied into the close order bonus being 10 plus strength only, because the Chaos Dragon is now the only dragon that retains +1 combat res for having close order, because it has 10 wounds, and therefore it is 10 unit strength 10. The way Ridden Monsters works is your unit strength is your number of wounds. What's quite funny is the Chaos Lord is 10 wounds because he starts with 4 and he gets +6. If you put a Sorcerer on a Chaos Dragon, which is generally not great in the current meta, so it'd be interesting to see if that becomes something that's worth doing. If it is impetuous, the Sorcerer only has 9 wounds, so it doesn't get the benefit of being close order, and it's got the downside of being impetuous. The benefit of being unit strength 10 close order bonus. Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe it's to do with the fact that they're 2 heads and they've got a warring nature. If it's a fluff change, a thematic change, that makes sense, although I don't know that it needed to be added in as a balancing mechanic there. Maybe they just thought the Chaos Dragons were too good, and I will say, as someone who's played and won an event with Warriors of Chaos, I'm not upset to see Chaos Dragons toned in a little bit, but I think the Warfire Dragon might be the one that worries me more than the Chaos Lord. Anyway, by the by, that's interesting. I have no strong feelings on this, other than it's funny. Empire State Troops get warband. Sure. I think that's fine. You've got... Warband is typically something you see in terms of the large... Like, it's normally an evil faction thing, right? I can't think of many good factions that have warband, but it does have some nice bonuses. You've got the leadership bonus, so you're not as tied into characters to making you not run away, which I think is really nice. You are more vulnerable to being charged by stuff with first charge or being disrupted if you're in terrain, because you come to rely on and you build around the leadership bonus that you've got for having your ranks. If they're not also Horde, you're only getting +2 to your leadership, which is quite nice. And you do get rerolls to charges. So this would be a really nice bonus to State Troops. And while it's not thematically tied in the way that you sort of the other armies that have got it would expect. So Warband on Orcs and Goblins kind of makes sense to me because they're a huge sort of go. It's a big mob that wants to run forwards. The State Troops having Warband doesn't fit that way thematically, but I think the bonuses fit thematically. You know, they're in theory highly trained individuals. They are more consistent than your average troops. That's kind of, you know, they're a disciplined unit, but they can lose their head in the heat of battle. You can't use the warband bonus if you are testing to restrain. So yeah, no, I think this is interesting. Is that enough to make Empire State Troops good? I don't think so, because I think they're about twice the points of a skeleton. Yeah, not sure. There's not really much in here about points rebalancing. There is a little bit that we'll get to, but I'd like to see some points rebalancing, potentially. I'm not even huge on seeing the stuff that's at the top nerfed. I'm not against it, but I'd more like to see the stuff at the bottom, like state troops, for example, get a bit of an efficiency boost. So knock a couple of points off state troops, get them down to 5 points. That may be too good. It probably isn't, but, you know, you need to see the full game to have the full breakdown of that, I guess. Anyway, state troops with warband, sure, why not? Cast and dispel bonuses are capped at wizard level +1, so no stacking mortis engines. Cool, yeah, this is great. I am in favour of this. Whether or not this is true, this is something that I hope comes in. If we see your casting bonus capped at wizard level +1, even Mortuary Cult being capped at a +5 means that actually building defense and magic resist into your army is worthwhile. As it stands, the only way to consistently have magic defense against Mortuary Cults specifically, or, you know, double stacking Mortis engines, it kind of feels like Infernal Puppet's the only thing. So if you're capped at 5, that's really big. You can take the item that gives you, you know, +1 to dispel rolls and 3 inches of extra dispel range, and that's going to be really meaningful, because at worst, you need to beat your opponent's roll. Great. If they don't have an efficiency boost, you're just casting with, you know, or dispelling, sorry, where if you equal the roll, you get rid of the spell. So that's really good. I think healthy. I don't necessarily think magic is a huge problem in the game, but I think it is something that should be addressed at the top level. Like, I'm not worried about most armies casting, like Empire, even though Empire can take 3 wizards under a normal rule of 3, or I guess technically uncapped wizards. Yeah, it doesn't bother me. That's not something that I think needs to be limited, other than just it plays in a way that isn't sort of traditionally Warhammer Fantasy, where all of your range damage comes from 3 models flying around. Maybe that is traditionally Warhammer Fantasy now that I think about it. But, yeah, anyway. Cast Dispel bonuses capping at wizard level +1. Very healthy. Would love to see that come into the game. Poison now +1 to wound, not auto wound. This is a big nerf, I think. So, +1 to wound... Hold on. Is it... I didn't even think about this. So if it's +1 to wound, let's say that you're normally hitting... A lot of the poison bricks are hitting on 5s. So undead hit on 5s no matter what. Well, unless beastmen ruin their day. And goblins hit on 4s, but there's probably like range penalty or something in there, so probably 5. So yeah, most things are going to hit on 5s. So instead of auto-wounding 1/6 of the time, 1/3 of the time you get +1 to wound. So, because you hit on 5s, and then I'm assuming it's just, if you have poison, you get +1 to wound. The poison makes it easier for you to wound, something like that. So, +1 to wound, that is objectively worse, but the better your ballistic skill, the better this becomes. So if you've got a way to hit more consistently, if you can hit on 4s with this, I think that's maybe where the math starts to pan out. And also, any way that you can put 6s, like Armor Bane, on there as well, this becomes better, because you're still rolling to wound instead of just getting the auto wounds. So if you've got a Razor standard in a big unit, sure, you don't need 6s to wound because you've got +1 to wound, but any of those 6s that you do roll do become AP2, or, you know, 2 more AP on top of what you had already. I think this is interesting. It's hard to evaluate outside of seeing all of the changes together on paper, but this could be interesting. I would not be upset to see a poison nerf in terms of not just having the big TMP blocks floating around and killing things at range, but also, as I say every time I say this, I want to see everything toned down. So I want to see Bretonnians toned down at the top end. I want to see the dragons toned down at the top end as well. So it's not such a necessity for armies to bring these big bricks of poison shooting. But yeah, +1 to wound, interesting change. We'll have to see how that goes. Pillar of Fire, now random move. Well, I don't know if these leaks are true. I am 99.9% sure that is true. I think just Pillar of Fire has existed as it has been for too long, and I mean, there's footage of me saying it going back for, I'm assuming, at least a year, talking about how good Pillar of Fire is and why it's too good and it probably shouldn't be. Obviously, I've played a lot of Pillar of Fire. That's kind of the thing that happens when you go to tournaments. You find the things that are good and you play them. But I would love to see this nerfed. I will say, I have leaned on Pillar of Fire quite a lot in my my tournament list, so it'll be interesting to have to play without having that tool, because it's such a pain in the backside to have to play against. But yeah, making it random move, I think that just kills the spell. It becomes one of the other vortexes that exists, and you don't really play the other vortexes. I sometimes pick or roll into summon elemental spirits and keep it. That's fine. It doesn't harm allies, so that feels aggressively okay. Pillar of Fire, as it stands with random move, and it's short range, I don't love it. And also, now that it's a random move, instead of, having to roll and getting that hit and having it stand still, I think Pillar of Fire might be dead. And good. I'm pleased that it is probably dead. That can get out of the game. Make it more like traditional actual rank and flank without having to worry about these awful vortices. Speaking of things that are almost certainly true, TMP Holy Within. Yeah, I hope this is the change that comes in. TMP as it stands, where within just means that one part of your unit has to be within 12 of where one part of your unit was, means that you can do some very silly things. And just, the night before, I played a game where I ended up having my unit of sisters, which is 27 sisters plus 3 characters, and I put them into open order because I was worried about getting charged. And then the next turn I travel Mystic Pathways, and I, from where it was on Mountain Pass, the left side of the unit was over here, and the right side was over here, and they sort of ended up over here. One model in there must have travelled easily 40 inches, so yeah, it's very silly the way it is currently. And I think Holy Within is still incredibly good. It's not incredibly good for those big bricks. It's very limiting if you're playing those big pie plate 100 model units, and that's fine. The thing that it's really good at is repositioning units that are sort of out of place. Moving a unit 12 inches and then getting to face them in any direction you want, that is super strong. So this is still a good spell. It just means that it's got a different use case, which I'm super fine with. Ogre Blade is 75 points. Sure, I guess. Plus 10 points. Obviously, the thing that this changes is you can't take Talisman of Protection with it. Okay. I don't know that Ogre Blade and Talisman of Protection on a non-dragon character is a problem. So maybe you just limit it so that dragons can't take it. But this doesn't do that. In fact, the faction that uses this the best, Warriors of Chaos, have an inbuilt ward save. You can still just take an Ogre Blade. You can take an Ogre Blade and Magic Resist 2, and a Favour of the Gods for 100 points. So Chaos Dragons looking like they've come out pretty well out of these changes here. It's a very... Yeah, I don't love this. The Ogre Blade is not something that I typically play with Elves, because you've got 4 attacks at Strength 4 base. As soon as you get up to that 5th attack or the Strength 5 base, it starts to become much more valuable. And I don't necessarily want them to balance it around the base stats that the unit, the army that's buying it has. But it is very different. And I feel like the halves, being Warriors of Chaos, will still just use this as effectively with basically no change to how they were writing the list before. So yeah, I don't know if this going to 75 points does anything at all in terms of killing its popularity on the stuff that it's really good. Speaking of things that will push Warriors of Chaos towards putting an Ogre Blade on the dragon, Chaos Regen items now cavalry and infantry only. This is a good change. It's a little bit of a shame, and by a little bit of a shame, I mean a real shame, because I loved putting those on chariots. But we don't need to save stack on chariots, we don't need to save stack on dragons. That pushes us further towards single characters, single units that are very hard to remove, and takes away from the vibe of playing the rank and flank that I'd quite like to see us move towards. So a little bit of a shame for me in my Herald of Darkness dreams where I'm running loads of chariots, but this is fine. This is good, in fact. Let's benchmark it there. This is a good change. I wouldn't be upset to see Seed of Rebirth become cavalry and infantry only. I don't think it talks about it on here. No Seed of Rebirth on this list. But yeah, if Warriors of Chaos can't triple save their dragons, I don't think High Elves should be able to either. And again, this is someone who's played High Elves and plays Warriors of Chaos. So yeah. Royal Pegasus plus 10 points, Pegasus Knights plus 4 points. These are, I think, a very light touch. If these are the only changes to points that we see in terms of what you can take for Bretonnians, I don't think their build changes at all. They maybe lose one Pegasus Knight if they were running like two squads of 4. Maybe you go down to a 4 and a 3, or maybe you just go to one bigger unit of 6 or something like that. But yeah, needing 20 points in characters and then 20 points in special, that's not meaningful. That's not enough of a change that it makes them not worth taking. So yeah, I'm curious as to whether that actually makes a difference to the builds. Maybe we see other tweaks, because obviously, if this is true, we've seen Jav talk about the fact that there is more coming as well. This is only part of the whole. Maybe this is combined with changes to the axe. I always forget the name of it. The Frontier axe, which is obviously Ogre Blade for 30 points. Ogre Blade going up to 75 points as well. I guess is a little bit of a nerf, but yeah, I don't feel like this actually changes how things work. And also, skirmishers can only charge if over half the unit can draw line of sight to the target. This is fine. I'm assuming line of sight will be front arc, because if it's just a case of half the unit has to be able to draw line of sight, if you're in skirmish, you just sort of do a little bit of a V formation with gaps so that you can just always see. Like, I think there's a way to array them so that there's never any part of the board which is invisible to a unit of like 6 models. So I'm assuming this is meaning that you have to look if you can see from the front arc, but I don't know. If we assume it is front arc, then sure, but even then I don't think it makes much difference. Like, if you've got 5 models, again, you just do sort of a V where you've got one model at the front and then you go like that, and then you go around the side as well. You can have just like a really, from one side you've got like a big 90-degree arc, and on the other side you've got a big 90-degree arc, and as long as you don't let people get behind you, you've got basically the entirety of the board that you can see. So I'm not sure about that. Maybe I don't understand the skirmish change, but we'll see. Arcane Urgency, now 1 less to cast at 9+. This is one of the things that makes me go, I think this isn't true. Arcane Urgency is one of the best spells in the game, and they're making it easier to cast. What? Yeah, I don't know what to say about this one. Oh, maybe we're really worried because you're capped at wizard level +1. So instead of being able to cast Arcane Urgency automatically with none of the armies that can stack casting bonuses can take battle magic in a reasonable way. Yeah, I don't know what this is meant to mean. Arcane Urgency casting on a 9 would be incredible for me. Like, I will take Pillar of Fire is dead, but Arcane Urgency is cast more reliably. Casting on a 5 instead of a 6 is actually a huge change in terms of reliability, just because of the deviation of on a 2d6. Yeah, if you can cast it on a 5, the only things you don't cast it on are a double 1. So yeah, a 2, a 3, or a 4. So that's a 2, a 3, or a 4. So that's a 1 in 6 chance to not cast it. Whereas as soon as you go up to casting it, you need to roll a 6. There's 5 there. Anyway, I'm waffling. Stats, just trust me that going to a 9 with a +4 to cast is disgustingly easy to cast. You get it almost all the time. Stupidity prevents casting and shooting. Good. Yeah, that's fine. Again, this is something that I don't want to say abused, but this is something that I have played around with. The Cold One Knight unit, when I was playing Dark Elves, I'd put the Ruby Ring of Ruin on there, and I'd fail the stupidity test, and I wouldn't move, and then I would just cast the Ruby Ring of Ruin anyway. I am happy to see this going away. This is absolutely fine. I'm not worried about that at all. Skin Wolf buffs don't affect characters. Did they not FAQ this? I know they FAQ'd the Sisters of the Thorn to make it clear that the unit gets the ward save, not the character. But yeah, I think it's fair to say that this is not an intended interaction, so just having that clarified is good. I'm super fine with that. Vortices are now dispelled from the Vortex, not the Wizard. Hell yeah. You know how many times I've lost just I was going to say lost my shit. You know how many times I've failed to dispel a vortex because my opponent's cast Spiritual Vortex, or Spirit Vortex, I think it is, which is cast on 11, but then the wizard's at the back of the board, but the vortex is right in the front of me because they're playing undead, so they have reserve moves, so they fly forwards with Steed of Shadows 10 inches, then fly backwards as well. You're like, oh, fantastic. Really pleased about that. I need to roll a double 6 to Fate to dispel this. No longer. If you want to affect me with your vortex, my wizard is going to be able to interact with it. It does make vortexes significantly less powerful, but I think that's fine, because I think they had a disproportionate effect on the game compared to other spells. If you, and this is something that over sort of the last 6 or 7 months I've been thinking about more, if you stop thinking about the game in terms of like pure damage and just sort of the effect of things, as you get more and more games, you'll do this naturally. It doesn't actually have to do damage to have an effect, and I think there's a number of vortex spells that just affect the game disproportionately more than anything else for like a single cast roll or a single roll or a single model. Yeah, so I think this is a really good change, and hopefully it doesn't make them unplayable. I'd like to still see them in the meta, especially because the damage vortexes are so bad in terms of doing damage. I think they just become unusable. But yeah, hopefully the control piece vortexes still have a place. They're just not as strong as they were. Impact hits happen before challenges are declared. This makes thematic sense. This is good. And it stops characters from being challenged out and, losing to just straight combat res that your opponent has stacked up if they're on a chariot, for example. I think that's very interesting. Does this make chariots a real problem? Maybe. Am I excited to play loads of chariots? Hell yeah. They're also capped at a 3-up armor save. So this is what I was talking about, where you've got to sort of look at all the changes. So right now, it looks... Oh, actually, we'll get to it further down. So dragons look like maybe they're on their out, but I'm not super sure about that. But something like a chariot gains a lot of value, because if you're capped on combat res and you're not getting that combat res 1, and you're going to struggle to do too many points of overkill, well, maybe the solution is to just take a chariot, charge your opponent, get the impact hits, kill 3 or 4 models outside of the challenge, win on combat res that way. Job's a good one. I think that's a really interesting potential change. So yeah, impact hits happen before challenges are declared. I'm definitely thinking, if I want to take a ridden monster, I'll be looking to see if there's any way to give them impact hits. Obviously, I think it's been FAQ'd out now, actually, but the Black Orc on Wyvern, who doesn't really need to spend that much on defenses, you can just give them a regen and a charm shield, which is 45 points. You theoretically could stack loads of the hat that gives them an impact hit. I think, unfortunately, they've FAQ'd it so you can only wear 1 hat for Orcs and Goblins, or maybe just in general, but yeah, that would be one way to get around overcapping challenges. Trollhammer Torpedo is now cumbersome and strength 5. Cumbersome, for those of you who get these two confused with ponderous as well, which I always do. Cumbersome is the one where you can't stand and shoot with it. It's not the one where you get an extra -1 for moving. And it's strength 5. This was kind of the anti-dragon tech that you could take for dwarves, and I don't know that they are getting better to enough of an extent that they need to be nerfed. I don't know why it's being nerfed. Maybe it's just being nerfed because it doesn't really make any sense that it's strength 8. It's just like having, in this game, everyone's running around with lasguns, and then one army gets a las cannon on their troops. It's a weird one. I would have been okay with it not being changed. However, there is a pit of dread every time I get shot by one of those, so on the flip side, maybe I'm happy to see it go. But yeah, odd change there. And again, something that makes me go, is this true? Who can say? An odd change there. Trolls get Motley Crew. This is both interesting and odd. So there's like 3 things to pick at here. First of all, Motley Crew is the rule that lets you have different weapons and armor. Okay, cool. Trolls just have the same armor. Okay, I no longer care. I don't really care about the weapons. So that's point one. It's just, well, there's no way for me to do any shenanigans to get them to a better armor save. I'm not giving some of them a shield. They don't have shields, and they don't have armor. You know, the stone trolls have a 6-up armor save, but that's it. So I'm not really bothered about that. And then my second thought was, what if I get to put different models together? Can I do a unit of river trolls mixed in with stone trolls? Is that something we can do? And that's a little bit more interesting. Or you just go, here's like half stone trolls, half common trolls, and the common trolls benefit from the magic resist of the stone trolls, but then also the 6-up armor save that they've got there as well, and you just take off the common trolls first and save a few points. I don't know if that's exciting enough. And then finally, they can have different weapons, and I don't think that matters, because unless something massively changes in the meta, I don't see how a load of strength 5 hand weapon attacks with no AP is going to be useful at all. I don't think trolls get chopper, do they? So they wouldn't even get the AP 1 on the charge. I'll have to double check that one. But yeah, even with that, I'm not really bothered about getting 4 hand weapon attacks at weapon skill 3. I think I'm just going to go great weapons with all of them. So yeah, this is an odd change. But I will say, if something like this did come in, I'm not against it. I'm not against rules that don't really have any rules benefit, but they are, like, it just lets people play with their collection better, so people might have a load of trolls, and some of them, you know, in the box, some of them come with hand weapons, some of them come with great weapons, and it just makes it easier for people to get stuff on the table. I'm not opposed to it from that perspective. I just don't see a reason for it in terms of rules writing. Flails get Armor Bane 1 on the charge. This is a really deep change for something that I don't know is particularly worth changing. Like, they were already only good on the charge, so it makes them better on the charge, so that's cool. But then, in subsequent turns, they're terrible. I kind of just feel like if I want, and this is not always the case, but if I've ever got a flail, a lot of the time you can also take great weapons, and if you've got the option between the two, yes, you lose the initiative for great weapons, but you're putting it on a unit that's going to charge anyway if you're worried about the flail bonus. So I just prefer the great weapon. Yeah, this is a change I'm not really following as to why, but maybe it just shifts the needle enough. Stuff like Marauder Horsemen can obviously take flails. They can't take great weapons, so maybe it makes them appealing enough that you can just put some Mark of Khorne flail Marauder Horsemen into your list and feel really happy about the output they have. I'm not opposed to that. I'd like to see that sort of unit, the cheap heavy hitters that are also made out of tissue paper. You know, I think that's pretty cool. So yeah, not really sure on this change, but I think it's interesting if it is true. Similarly, we're seeing halberds get AP 2 on the charge. Is it plus 2 AP on the charge? Right now, halberds are strength plus 1, AP 1, armor bane 1. If this makes them strength plus 1, AP 3, armor bane 1 on the charge, that's pretty spicy. That puts them above lances, puts them above great weapons. You would have to have them on the charge only, so infantry units don't get the benefit of it, which I think is odd. Or infantry units are going to get the benefit of it less unless they win on combat rares and then they follow up, yada yada yada. There are worlds where infantry will get it, but it's mostly cavalry. And then when I think about cavalry, I'm like, well, there's not really much cav that can get them. Chosen chariots, or I think chariots in general for chaos chariots, have halberds on the back of the chariot, but they don't have swift stride, so they're faster than infantry but slower than cav. Then you've got, what else have we got? Demigryphs, but then the demigryphs lose their 2-up save, and infantry and cavalry are the only things that can get a 2-up save, so it almost feels like giving up your ability to have that 2-up save in combat is not worth, but then you'll hit much harder on that single attack, actually. So yeah, maybe it's just lances remaining for those. Yeah, this is an odd change, and we'll get to it. In fact, we'll skip to the bottom one next, but I'm not sure. Also, the way that they've written it, AP plus 2, I think means that you'd be technically giving your opponent an increased armor save. Just to nitpick, but yeah, I'm reading that as they become AP 3 on the charge, which would be an interesting stat line. Strength plus 1 AP 3, armor bane 1 on the charge. Like, that's different enough that I'm going to have to sit down and think about what use case my unit has and whether I want to be using it. Like, I'm pretty jazzed to see halberds on Chaos Chosen Chariots where they countercharge. That sort of thing I think is really interesting. But yeah, we'll see. We will see. Moving to the end, and then we'll come back to the one before it. Infantry/heavy infantry only. +1 to armor save in melee if using a hand weapon and shield up to a max of 3. This has been referred to as a parry save by a lot of people, because parry saves were something that existed in previous editions of the game. And I think in previous editions of the game they gave a ward save, a 6-up ward save. So this just gives you +1 to your save is interesting. Now, immediately, the thing that everyone talks about was Ironbreakers. Ironbreakers obviously already have full plate and a shield, so they just don't get the benefit of this, which I think is an odd place to put them in. But yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to seeing infantry get more consistency buffs. I would like to see this kills anything that isn't a hand weapon and a shield for infantry, with the exception of, I guess, they're trying to make other two-handed weapons like flails and halberds more appealing. But you're never going to use a spear, right? So how's that going to work? You're never going to use... What are the other terrible weapons that exist? You're not using thrusting or throwing spears. I guess... I don't think there's any units with morning stars, but you get the point. This is an odd change, and the armies that it really benefits is anyone who has AP built into their hand weapons. So weirdly, depending on how the maths works out on like the poison +1 to wound instead of being auto wound, skinks potentially become less valuable as a straight damage source. You probably still use them for like space control and picking off smaller units, but you're not necessarily killing big things with them. But the Saurus have AP built into their hand weapons, so maybe hand weapon shield Saurus become more interesting. I think they've got 2 attacks as well, so that makes me wonder, do Saurus make a little bit of a comeback, or Tomb Guard especially? Obviously Tomb Guard are able to use halberds. Do you just use the hand weapon shield? I guess it's an interesting balance where you get to pick between the two if you've got the halberd and the hand weapon shield there. Warriors of Chaos as well. Obviously they've got AP on their weapons, but also magical attacks on their hand weapons. So Warriors of Chaos, getting to a 3-up armor save in combat. That's interesting. That is interesting. I want to play some bricks of infantry. I do have something like 50 or maybe 60 Warriors of Chaos with various loadouts. So, yeah, this is a cool change. I'm not sure about how I feel about it being capped at 3+. It's probably good for the health of the game, but it does feel bad for the outliers. Yeah. Who knows? An interesting change there. And then finally, to double down on the infantry buffs, infantry get +1 combat res if they outnumber their opponent. Now, this is cool. This is really nice because it really disincentivizes single models. So, for example, if I'm running a high elf dragon and I charge it into your unit of infantry, not only have I lost the close order bonus because I've only got 9 wounds, you get +1 for combat res as long as you've got at least 10 models, which you're going to have because you're an infantry brick and you're just challenging me out. So, yeah, you're immediately at like 2 more combat res than you were before, and now every army in the game can beat me. So that's what you've got: close order, standard, rank, outnumber. Maybe you need to put war banner on your unit on the standard as well, but you can get to a point where you can always match a dragon without having to put a battle standard bearer in, and I think that's really, really key. Although I guess it sucks for any army that isn't able to put magic banners on the units. But then counterpoint to that, those units typically have horde, so you're getting a 3rd rank bonus in there as well. Anyway, I think that's a good change. It's surprisingly well balanced as well. Like it doesn't feel heavy-handed. It's quite nice as well for if you're taking big units of, let's say, for example, I mean, the big abuser of this will probably be like Night Goblins, because you can still take the Fanatics. But if you're running 30 Night Goblins, that unit is actually potentially going to do something outside of just being a Fanatic delivery system. We might see people paying for, I was going to say spears, but actually the parry save means that you probably just go hand weapon shield. But anyway, the extra static combat res of outnumbering your opponent is valuable, but it's also not something that you can super rely on, because if you go into something, let's say I've got 14 Swordmasters and you've got 20 Night Goblins, and for some reason you don't hit me with any Fanatics. if I kill more, like enough of you, if I kill 6 more models than you do, or 7 more models, you lose that point of combat res and I gain it. So it is a little bit of a risky push and pull mechanic there, which I think is really, really fun to play around with. It's not a difficult change to wrap your head around, but it adds a level of complexity, specifically for like infantry versus infantry combat. So, yeah, I like it. That sounds pretty interesting and a good buff to infantry. So these are, again, I really want to reiterate, we don't know if these are true. Do not start planning your army around it, but, you know, feel free to start theory crafting around it. Just maybe don't buy stuff yet. I'm sure we'll see the actual FAQ sooner rather than later. But yeah, there's a lot in there that makes me go, this is bizarre and probably not true, such as the Arcane Urgency change. But then there's a lot of stuff in here that makes me go, this is actually really interesting and would make me a lot more excited to put different units on the table. And I think that's something that we need, really. I've talked about this multiple times on stream or on videos, where I think that the balance across the board for Old World is pretty good for a Warhammer game. That's not to say that some factions are underpowered, and it's not to say that some things are too good and other aspects are too bad. Dragons are too good, Pegasus Knights are too good, infantry's generally too bad outside of certain interactions. But I think across the whole, the game is reasonably well balanced, and I'm really impressed with their first version that they've brought out. That said, we're 18 months in. I am very keen for a bit of change to the meta, a bit of change to what's best in the game. And I think seeing something like this coming out once a year or so would be a really nice, you know, pace that they could set. If we assume that we're going to see this, you know, Old World coming out every 3 years, for example, that's typically the release schedule. Some people are going to say, oh, Horus Heresy's on a 4-year release schedule. We're going to be way bigger than them. We're going to replace Age of Sigmar. There's my my clickbait. But if we are on a 3-year release schedule, I'd like to see 1 year in, 2 years in, a big shake-up like this, where there's a lot of things that address the things that are the issue in the game. There's always going to be stuff that's too good. There's always going to be stuff that is too weak. What it is going to change, and how far apart the top and the bottom are can change as well, but there will always be a most optimal way to play. I'd just like to see that shaken up, so we're not just seeing, for example, Pegasus Knights for a full 3 years. I'd like to see some variety in there. But, yeah, we'll see. This would be cool. I'm not sure how reliable it is, but if we do see it come through... What are your thoughts on the FAQ? Do you think it's real? Is there anything in there that you think is missing, or anything in there that you think is completely unrealistic, or if it does come through would make the game worse in some way? I am curious to hear the community's thoughts, and I have been sort of vaguely keeping an eye on general comments, but people tend to pick at very specific things. So if you have got any thoughts, please do let me know down below, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting to the end of the video. If you've reached this point and you haven't already, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, a subscription if you haven't done those things. It just helps me get seen by more people, boost me up in the algorithm, all of the stuff that the YouTubers do like to say. If you would like to support me in my goal to become a full-time YouTuber, I would absolutely appreciate that. You can become a member below. There are various perks to those, name at the end of the videos, all that good stuff, but it also unlocks some VIP areas in Discord if you become a Longbeard or Ground Knight tier supporter. Those VIP sections are the only parts that are locked away in Discord. You don't have to be a member to join the Discord. I'd recommend that you should. We've got about 450, 500 people on there. It's a great place for discussion, a lot of fun. I do try and chime in as much as possible. And it's also where the Fix My List show lists are put, and also if you are one of the Grail Knight or Longbeard tier supporters, where you participate in choosing which list I play in the monthly Pick My List series.